So what my colleague's doing, as you can see here, is they're sending out an email to all the members of their congregation to remind them to renew their membership. But the part I thought was interesting is they had picked the top 100 out of 1,100 members to check to see if they can pay the same amount. And you can see like they've done the math for what percentage of their overall budget these people account for. And then you can also see they've identified some other people who, and this gets back a little bit to our conversation about what is fitting. Other people who maybe they feel like could give more, and maybe in the past they have not given more, or maybe people who, you know, they may be in a business. Gosh, if any of us have the person in any of our congregations who was the inventor of Zoom, someone was telling me just moments ago that that guy in 1 month is now worth whatever he was worth. He's now worth $2 billion. If you had him in your congregation, I'm sure you would be asking him to make a really large gift. And then you'll see under point number 4 that they have made a decision at their congregation to do a little bit of that work that maybe more traditionally has been done through the Jewish Free Loan Society, through local social services, and maybe through a rabbi's discretionary fund. And then you saw the government grant. So what I'd like you to think about in this, and I'm going to break us into breakout groups, is if you can think about and talk about in your breakout groups who it might, how many, because, you know, I'm lucky and my congregation's lucky to have a full-time fundraiser, me. But if you can think about your congregation, how many outreach phone calls could you do? And maybe that, whether that's you or that's your imam or that maybe your board members, you know, could you reach 5 people? Could you reach 10 people? Yes, thank you. And a reminder to please feel free to keep this, this note. So I'm going to invite you to go into breakout groups now for maybe, let's say, about like 7 or 8 minutes, and talk about, you know, kind of talk through how many people could you personally connect with. And it doesn't have to be 100. This is an organization that has an executive director and a full-time fundraiser. I don't believe most of you have a full-time executive director and a full-time fundraiser, but with your limited resources, how many people do you think you could reach? So I'm gonna invite my lovely colleague here to move you into groups.
Okay, our presenter is back, and mostly everybody has joined back in. I think, Anne, your microphone might be off just presently. Yeah, that's okay.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the reminder.
It's no problem at all. I'm still actually waiting for around maybe 15 more people just to accept that prompt on their screen. Otherwise, we're good to go with a full house. If you want to resume, you certainly can.
Sure, thank you. So I didn't know if people want to put in the comments, if you started to have an idea of how many people you think that you can reach out to. And it was interesting in our group, we had a large human rights organization that actually has staff. And I was also noting, you know, if you're we had a religious school. So there's a wide range of organizations, which makes sense. And there's also a wide range, whether you have, in the case of this one organization, 30,000 supporters and staff, that's still, like, you're not going to be able to probably phone 30,000 people. And if you've got, you know, a congregation of 500 and maybe a part-time imam with board, you're not going to maybe be able to phone everyone. That's just going to happen. Did anyone have any other questions about numbers or any thoughts about numbers they wanted to share with the whole group? So I'm just going to note in talking to Sadak and Wahid, who are part of a large organization, Wahid was commenting, and I'm finding this in my work as well, that it's much I would really encourage you, and this is something that Imam Irshad had talked about last week. So I keep referring to him because I believe many of you were on that webinar, and I also believe he gave very sound advice. I think there's two things. One is people are at home and they're isolated, and Wahid was talking about how in calling people, the calls may take a bit longer, but because people aren't traveling, you can reach them. And it's an opportunity to have a more personal relationship. And I have someone in our congregation that I called, and she's not, she's a very private person. We ended up having a 15-minute conversation. It turns out she loves Broadway plays. And I now feel like I love Broadway plays too. We now have a connection. I now have something I can talk to her about. If we decide to do some music programming, she might be someone I call. Like you're going to want to make these calls to make connections. The other reason why you want to make these calls, and that's similar to, I'm going to just go back to my share screen and get us back to the slide so we can think about this together. These, the reasons our organizations are important, they are still going to be important after COVID is just a distant memory and we've all packed our masks into boxes. So whether you're a congregation, whether you're a human rights organization, whether you're a religious school, whatever it is you're doing, that's still going to be important. I think the challenge for us right now is, I believe most of us on this call we're not a hospital. We may not be a frontline social service in the same way, although I imagine many of you may be providing some kind of financial support to members of your congregation who don't maybe otherwise have the means to pay their rent this month or to pay their food. So as you can see in this case study, which I've shared back with you on screen, whether it's 100 people you can call, whether it's 5 people you can call, whether it's 10 people you can call, the more people you can call, especially in that higher category, and I'm sorry, I forget the name of the person, but one of the gentlemen in our group was talking about from their religious school, talking about to some of the people who have more ability to give. You know, religious school is still going to be important. In fact, in many ways, we might argue it's more important now, but it's definitely going to be important a year from now. But if you're reaching out to those people now, telling them if you're financially stable, that you're financially stable, finding out how they're doing, building that relationship, it's really going to benefit you. Now, someone had asked this question and I'm sort of coming back to it. One of the things I think is going to be helpful in these conversations is, so this slide is an example of all the things that at least my congregation is currently doing. The thing I wanted to note, and I'll just kind of touch on this and then I'll move on. I mentioned to you that one of the things that's interesting and complicated in Judaism is because we don't touch money on the Sabbath, right? So we have this whole membership model. The thing that's interesting and complicated is we don't traditionally believe in using any technology also on the Sabbath or Jewish holidays. So that has gone from, you know, only very liberal congregations having digital services, because it goes back to a belief that you don't light a fire, and so we view electricity as being fire. So we've gone as a congregation all the way from we never stream services, and now we're streaming all our services, which in the past, so it's kind of an interesting moment in the Jewish community to have this change. And I'm sure we'll all find other changes. But what I wanted to harken back to, and I've mentioned it before, but I thought it was excellent, was when Imam Irshad, you may want to do an email to those, all members, even those you can't phone, because we're kind of very email heavy, Imam Irshad last week had an excellent example of, here's all the things that our community, here's all the things that our mosque has been doing. And it talked about phoning members and streaming services and Zoom School. It talked about all these things. You can see my synagogues doing very similar things. But it's a reminder, like, we're still here for you, right? Because people want to know in this time that you're still available to them. Now, our next exercise, we're going to stay together on. But I just want to talk about, in my congregation, we actually did a call out because one of the questions that came up evidently yesterday and last week was, what if you're largely volunteer based? So if you're doing a situation similar to this, here's all the things we're doing for you email. As part of that, you may want to do here's some ways in which we could also use some volunteer help. One of the things we're finding at my congregation where I work, and I'm speaking for myself, not them, that's why I'm not using their name. But there are people volunteering who, we've had over 100 volunteer to make phone calls. Some of those people are not what you might call the usual suspects. Some of those people are not the people who usually put up their hand to volunteer. So that's been really great, but that might be a way. I find often I volunteer a lot, and whether it's the Toronto Fringe Festival or it's the Annex Singers where I sing, it always seems to be kind of the same 7 people doing all the volunteer work. This is a moment, if you feel comfortable, you may be able to do as one of your emails a call to ask for some volunteers for some of these tasks, and they may be able to help take some of the burden off of you. And then the only other thing I want to note, which I'm finding, it's an interesting new trend, it's brand new, is I'm also seeing this general trend towards an all volunteer Zoom call. So it's an opportunity for volunteers who maybe are used to being together, and maybe it's a way also for your new volunteers. Like, for example, if we've got 100 volunteers who are all phoning, maybe we do either a broad phone call, or I'm looking into maybe we might have one of the rabbis do a special study just for them and maybe talk about volunteerism in the Torah and why it's important as a way of thanking them. And hopefully it's a way to engage them. Because one of the things I think we want to be doing now is both looking at today and looking at a year from today. And so if you can use this time to build closer relations to your big donors and also maybe expand your volunteers or build closer relations, you're going to be so much stronger this time next year. Now, the next one I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you whether you pull out your phone or you pull out a piece of paper. And I think some of you may be able to do this, but I'm just going to start to talk about categories. I'm hoping you're going to take a moment and you're going to jot down, and as I say, whether it's on your phone or it's on a piece of paper, because what I'd like you to do is come out of this, hopefully with some ideas about how Jewish fundraising works, and whether some things like a free loan, a discretionary fund for clergy, whether there's a movement down the road for a federation, but also what can you do right now in preparation for Ramadan. So I talked in the last case study, how many do you think you can call? So hopefully you have a sense of that. If you think about who your top 10 supporters are, so hopefully you've got your pen out or you've got your phone out. And I'm not going to ask you to share names, but I'm asking you to just kind of jot down and think about who are some of your top 10 supporters. And you might want to think about, I think often in Canada, we often think of men first, but there may be some women who could be big supporters. It may be women. Often research shows us broadly, women tend to give in groups. There's a thing in the US called giving circles. You may have a group of women who study together, who maybe they together give money to your organization or might be willing to organize something. Another group, think about top supporters. We often think about individuals, but think about, is there a group? Is there a professional association? Do all the doctors have a professional association? Do all the accountants? Is there some group that you can benefit from? You may have some of these. I talked before about in free loan, I also talked about the self-help societies. You may have a self-help society, people who are from a same countries, from a same organization. Maybe they could band together and give some money. There are a lot of community businesses that are suffering. You may have a community business. If someone's in the medical supply business, they may have extra money right now. You know, there may be some people who are not the people you usually think of. There may be people who've done fundraising for you as a group. So maybe you have a group of people that always gets together and does a small golf tournament or does a small, I don't know what, a garage sale. There may be groups who always raise money for you. You could think about them. There may be people, because often one of the things I'm always looking at is how can I take money off the bottom line? You may have someone who runs a hardware store. And so maybe for your organization, if they could they could give you all your light bulbs and furnace filters and whatever for a year. That's a gift in kind, is what we talk about in charity. That's an opportunity where they maybe can help you knock some budget off. And if you have large expenses, that could be great. You might also want to think about professions. I think we're thinking a lot about doctors right now. That's a profession that's on the front line and also may have more to give right now. Accountants, interestingly, often tend to be very generous. So also think about groups in terms of profession. I'm going to pause here before I go to our last case study. If anyone has any suggestions, either of groups or ways people can identify top supporters, or if people have any other ideas or advice for the group about maybe how to find or think about who to prioritize in terms of those top supporters. I'm just going to pause, and I am going to chit chat while I pause. And if you have thoughts, please put them into chat. You may or may not have seen about this 99-year-old veteran in Britain who's raised something like 5 or 10 million pounds. When you think about who your top supporters might be, just think about, do you have someone like that, maybe that you know, maybe that you don't, like, think creatively. There may be people who are possible for you. I'm not seeing anything in chat, and you've been a wonderfully chatty group. So I'm going to move to our second to last slide. This is going to be what's going to happen from here. We're going to go into groups again in just a moment. And based on some of the stuff that I've talked about, based on some of the stuff you've learned in some of the previous sessions, I'm hoping that you can come up with 3 points of things that you can do on behalf of your organization, or you can help your organization do between now and Ramadan. Thank you for the reminder about retaining the case study. But so the question that we're going to be talking about, we'll talk about this for like 7 or 8 minutes. Then what's going to happen after that, the last slide I have has some free resources available to you. And at the very end, for just our last few minutes, I'm happy to open it up about questions about the presentation. There are a couple of questions about Judaism and congregations, and I'll be happy to answer those as well. So are we ready to go into groups to talk about what are 3 things you think you could do between now and Ramadan to really help you boost your fundraising?
I think so. I think I'm going to go ahead and initiate the groups just in the interest of time. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much. See everybody in a moment.
Just a reminder to keep your eyes on the screen and to accept the prompt in order to join one of the discussion groups. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're currently just waiting on the rest of our class to rejoin the main group. In the interest of time, we've allowed around 5 minutes for the second case study discussion. Okay, welcome back. More amazing participants. I'm just waiting on a few more, as well as our presenter, to get back to the main room before we can resume. Okay, welcome back everyone, including our presenter. And it looks like everyone kind of jumped back in right at the same time, so please feel free to proceed. And your microphone, I think, is muted once again.
It keeps muting itself, dag dirbit. So I wanted to just thank you all. I wanted to note, we talked about this in our group, and I really want to note it's been the consistent, strong advice. I harken back to Iman Ershad, who talked about stewardship. And our group, we were talking about, building the personal relationship. It may be that when you talk to that person, you may find out that they've got a family situation or they've got something going on. This Ramadan may not be the year they can give, or maybe they've been really blessed. And making that, one of the people in our group was doing both phone calls. They're also sending out a paper mailing. We were also talking about, if you have social media, you may want to be encouraging people, for example, in a paper mailing. You may want to be encouraging them to like you on Facebook or follow you on Instagram, or, if you have those other platforms, you want to try to connect people up in as many ways as possible. That way they can hear good news. What I'm last going to show you is, here are two resources that are free. And then after this, I'm going to open it up to any questions about this, or you have questions about congregations, and I'm happy to stay over, happy to stay until, 2 or so and answer that. So I'm the editor of Hillborn Charity e-news. So it is a free subscription. And taking my own advice, we are on Twitter and LinkedIn, not so active on Facebook. I do 4 fresh articles a week. And we've done topics on major gifts, on what to do with a canceled event, what to do if you have auction items donated for a fundraising event, like a lot of that information. Canada Helps, which many of you may be familiar with, it's a way to give online. If ever there was a moment where you are going to be able to learn so much about fundraising for free with excellent presenters, this is your moment. Canada Helps is doing a series of great free webinars with, and their emphasis tends to be for smaller charities, although I find their information is also helpful or useful for larger charities. But this is, thank you so much for posting that in chat. This is your moment. If you've got questions right now, I've been a fundraiser for a long time. I have lots of questions. There are lots of experts out there to help you. Thanks so much for putting those links in chat, both for Hillborn and for Canada Helps. We've got about 10 or so more minutes. I want to thank you. And there were a couple of more congregation questions I didn't have time to get into. I'm happy to answer any other questions you have about how to make your fundraising more effective for Ramadan, more questions about Jewish philanthropy, Jewish giving, or if you have just broader questions about how synagogues work, I'm happy to stay on for the next 10 or so minutes and answer any questions you might have.
Okay, I have a question about, are there any foundations or like giving grants for nonprofit organizations? Are you aware of any, like a grants? It could be for religious, could be for educational, specifically targeting nonprofit organizations.
That's a great question. There are organizations that provide, there are charitable foundations. There are a lot more in the US than there are in Canada, and I mean a lot more. There are some services. I'm thinking specifically, one's called, I don't own these companies. I don't have friends who own these companies. But there are ways to research those. There's one called Grant Connect. There's one Foundation Search, I think it's called. There's also one called iWave. I'm going to type iWave in. I'm going to actually type all these in.
Yes, please. Can you put them in the chat?
Yes. Often, oops. Often, okay, I've just put them in chat. Often you can get like a 1 month free subscription, a 1 week free subscription to kind of try it out. And I'm finding a lot of these services are being very generous right now because they have businesses to run too. So this is going to be an opportunity to maybe look at, just the only thing I would say with all these ones is often, let's say it's a week for free or it's a month for free. And what they often do is they get your credit card, and just like anything else, if you don't cancel, like if it's 30 days free membership, if you don't cancel on day 29, then they're going to charge your credit card. And so that's your responsibility to make sure you don't accidentally end up, paying for it and you meant to just take a look at it to see if it's valuable. But especially if you're a smaller organization, I think it's worth taking a look first to make sure that it makes sense for you.
Sure.
So I'm going to answer the question about salaries. Boy, that's such a good question. The average annual salary of a rabbi in Toronto. I have no idea. There is a principle in Judaism, which I don't think it's in the Torah, but I do believe it's in the rabbinic literature, that a rabbi should make around we're very, very different from Christians. There's streams of Christianity that believe in clergy should make as little money as possible because that's part of their service. There's a Jewish concept, and once again, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So if you had a different Jew here, they would totally disagree with me on this. There's a concept in Judaism that the rabbi is an exalted member of the community, and so the rabbi should make not like the least amount possible, not the most amount possible, but closer to somewhat in line with what the, kind of the high end of middle of the members of the congregation. So if the congregation is full of really wealthy people, a rabbi will make a much larger salary. If the congregation's full of not so wealthy people, then the rabbi will make kind of that same salary as, a plumber, a bus driver, a what have you. So there's not really one answer to that question. The other question about how synagogues handle large capital expenses, synagogues tend to handle those in a very traditional fundraising model. So very traditional, the board will look at a capital expense. Hopefully it's a planned one. They will often talk to let's say 5 to 10 largest donors. Ideally, this is like very classic capital campaigning. You're gonna, like, let's say your project's gonna be $500,000. Ideally, you're gonna try to see if your top 5 or 10 families are gonna maybe give you, let's say, half of that, maybe more. So that when you go out to the there's usually stages. So you're usually going to go to your wealthiest families, see if they have an interest, maybe go then to the next group. Oh, thank you. What a lovely set of information in chat. There's the Grant Connect information. So going back to capital, It will often be the case, so you go to your richest people first, ask for the most. You'll actually go to your next group, often ask for them privately. It's a lot of individual asks. And then there will come a stage at the end, hopefully when you've got 80 to 90% of it raised, where you're then going out to the whole congregation, asking everyone to give something. That's a pretty classical capital ask. If you're in an emergency situation, the furnace suddenly gives out, it will still then be the case. It may be the case that the rabbi's then going to call 2 or 3 larger donors and see if they'll either maybe make a loan or make a donation to try to help you get through it. Or does someone own a heating and cooling business? And so maybe would their business be willing to donate? There's a lot of that gift in kind slide I talked about earlier of, is there something that someone maybe as part of their business can afford to give you, which will help save you costs and will help them be beneficial. Other questions about grants, about synagogue expenses, about kind of how all this stuff is run? I'm sorry, I'm sitting next to my window, so I know it looks like I've turned into a ghost. I'll have to put a bigger curtain up next time. Well, I think I'm going to thank you guys. You've been amazing, and I've learned a lot from you, and I really hope this has been helpful to you guys as well. Thank you.
Rather, thank you, Anne Rosenfield, for being here with us today and for closing off actually Sound Vision's series of fundraising webinars. I think what a lovely way to close it off with your presentation about fundraising from the perspective of Judaism. And I really loved just witnessing all of those little parallels between fundraising and gift giving in Christianity, Judaism, as well as Islam. So it's also been a great learning opportunity for me as well. I do want to remind everyone that we do periodically, especially after these sort of presentations, send out evaluation forms. So you could feel free to submit any lingering questions through the evaluation. We'll be sure to forward it to Anne, as well as any really feedback on these sort of presentations. I've seen that we've been able to make a number of improvements in Sound Vision's webinars, specifically because of feedback that comes in, which is so valuable. So I do want to, in the interest of time, just close off and on behalf of Sound Vision and Sound Vision Canada, to thank everyone for joining us today, as well as to thank our very insightful presenter, Anne, for the incredible presentation. We do hope that she'll join us in the near future if we have the ability to redo something like this. So Sound Vision is once again an organization that aims to produce content that helps build bridges between neighbors and friends, with an emphasis on youth. Sound Vision is also a pioneer in spiritual Islamic education, and it is one of the umbrella projects included with its flagship projects such as Adam's World, as well as Muslim Fest, which is a festival here in Ontario, Canada. So without further ado, I just want to wish everyone a great rest of the weekend. I hope that everyone stays safe and sound. And we've had some comments coming in complimenting the lovely Zoom bomber and that we were graced with. So I wanted to throw that out there.
Yes, well, Pharaoh works for Cat Treat, so I guess that means he'll get his fair share.
And I hope to see Pharaoh again soon as well. And I'm going to be missing him as soon as I end this presentation. Thank you, everyone. And I'm sure you're taking a look at the nice thank yous to you that are coming in.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Everybody have a lovely day, and do keep the questions coming in to Sound Vision. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Be well.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye.